Hi, I'm Brian Welsh, and this is the Blocktalk podcast. Here we want to have real conversations about what's happening in the industry, what's happening in the block management manufacturing industry, what the challenges are, and what's shaping the future. I started it to talk to people who live it day to day, industry experts, government, anyone else who's a stakeholder who feeds into that industry. So whether you're here for a fresh perspective, insight, inspiration, whatever you're here for, I'm glad you're listening. Thanks very much. Welcome to another episode of the Blocktalk podcast. In this episode, we're focusing on transparency and property factoring, a topic brought sharply into focus by recent reporting in the Times, which raised serious questions around accountability, communication, and homeowner rights. Joining me today are Mark Griffin, MSP, Scottish Labour's housing spokesman, who's been vocal about the need for reform, and Derek MacDonald, who I've known for many years, a director at Newton Property Management, one of Scotland's most experienced factoring providers. This isn't about assigning blame. It's about starting a constructive conversation, one that brings together political voices and industry experience to explore what's broken, what's misunderstood, and how we move the sector forward. So welcome, Mark. Welcome, Derek.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see where we go first. Okay, so we might as well just dive straight in. So one of the big things mentioned in the Times was debt liability. Okay, now it's actually really interesting because we did a podcast yesterday where we had a solicitor who basically works for most of the big house builders, and he was talking about the framing of title deeds, deed of conditions, and also what happens at sale and these sort of things. It was a really interesting conversation because very much there is a process in place for these sort of things. Now, whether it's adhered to by the entire factoring community, that's an entirely different question, but it'd be interesting when that one comes out. So, Derek, let me come to you with this one first. How common is it for homeowners to be held responsible for debt that predates their ownership, and should it be allowed?
So it's actually relatively uncommon.
Okay.
You tend to find that most factors it's the lowest priority.
Okay.
When you've been in factoring for a number of years, you realise that there's certain things that really create friction between not only the factor and his customers, but actually between the owners of the building themselves.
Okay.
So it's really something. It's effectively the last resort.
Right. Okay.
That the factor would have. Not knowing too much about the circumstances of this particular case.
Okay.
My thoughts on it are that perhaps the factor hasn't had a proper process in place.
Okay.
So typically what you would find is that a factor will, on a regular basis, will update his customers about what the overall debt situation is.
Okay.
So there'll normally be an annual update to customers to say, look, we've got a certain amount of debt that we are pursuing, and data protection means that we can't really go into the details of that.
Okay.
But leave it with us. We're trying to take care of it. Then what happens is if anybody sells in that property, there's like a standardised list.
12 questions. So comes from this list. Yeah. We spoke about that yesterday.
Yeah. So that was all developed a good number of years ago. It was the Glasgow Conveyancers Forum, I think.
Okay.
That came up with this.
There's a now property standards group within the legal profession. Yeah.
And actually, it tidied up a real inconsistency.
Okay.
In the way that these things were done, because every solicitor had their own approach, and they were using terminology that wasn't consistent, etc. So this was all put together. So one of the questions does refer to, is there any debt, or I think it's, is there any debt that might be applicable in any terms of the deed of conditions, etc.
Yeah.
So at that point, if the factor has alerted his customers to the fact that there is a debt outstanding that's being pursued that might have to be recharged to the other owners, that's the point at which they have to disclose that to the solicitor. And then it's down to the solicitor and his customer to decide how they want to deal with that. Because if there is very occasionally there's a large debt that can be collected, so you might have situation where someone's passed away and it's with the estate or whatever it is, and it rumbles on for a long time. It's then up to them to decide, do they want to go ahead with that purchase, or are they is there going to be some sort of accommodation behind the scenes with the seller? Okay. But there's got to be a process in place.
Okay. And it sounds like there's far more than there used to be, with this kind of 12 point question that is.
Yeah, and it's been really helpful, and it's, actually in terms of because you can get really busy times of the year.
Yeah.
Certain times of the year, September, people come back from holidays, they start to sell properties in particular, and also in the springtime. And from the factor's perspective, having this standardised system means that we can hopefully get the answers back a lot quicker. Whereas when we were getting like bespoke questions that were coming in, it was, let's go off and think about exactly what we're asking.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, from a tech point of view, we have a bit in our software that handles those 12 questions anyway. And I mean, and in the future, should certainly have the ability to draw some of the information from the system and provide that automatically. Okay, Mark, is this something that's come up in your conversations with people?
I mean, I don't want to say it's an isolated incident, but it seems like from the coverage in the news, it's not something I've ever had any casework or correspondence from any constituents or any other MSPs about debt. But I do think there's a fundamental issue of fairness of inheriting debt that wasn't built up when it wasn't your property. But I also think that perhaps relying on the survey and the questions in itself when you're buying and selling a house and you maybe something slips your mind, solicitors in the process, the conveyancing process, will get in touch with the factors themselves to get details on, return of flow and different things. Yeah. I mean, for me, it should really be for the solicitors to go through that level of detail with the factors at that point of sale, rather than relying on customers who will be at a very stressful and busy point in their life buying and selling to rely on that questionnaire. I think that's something that solicitors should be looking at.
So I think the questionnaire, actually, because I've just filled one in because I'm selling a house in Glasgow at the moment, and the questionnaire is quite generic, isn't it, for the home report? It's like, is there any common, do you have to pay any common charges, blah, blah, who's the factor, what's the charge, how much is it quarterly? And actually, to be fair, I'm not entirely sure how well that is critiqued after someone's filled it in anyway, because I've read some that were, do you have a factor? I don't know. And I know for a fact there's a factor in that building. You know what I mean? So I don't know. But I guess you're right. The questions of this sort of stuff definitely is down to the solicitor to be asking the factor. Yeah, without a doubt. Okay. I mean, the one of the big things in that article that kind of prompted us to go or to take the podcast this route, and we have yourself, your two of you today, and we have another MSP and another owner of factory business in a few weeks' time to discuss it as well. But I mean, I guess that point about the debt spreading was one of the main points of that article. Now, if it doesn't happen a lot, which I'm guessing it wouldn't anyway, because at the end of the day it would be far bigger news if it happened all the time. But Derek, do you think there's enough process in place to stop that happening?
In terms of the code of conduct and the regulation? Yeah. I mean, the ground rules are there. Yeah. When you think about the written statement, which is effectively factors the terms and conditions and how they will adhere to the code. I believe there was some discussion in this particular case that it was a couple of months after the person had been that they were provided with that. They should get that within 4 weeks.
The written statement of service. Yeah.
Most. You got to think about the machinery of the factor, the way that it's actually marked in your backgrounds. You've got some mechanical background. I understand this, that once the process starts, once we're alerted to the sale, there's normally a couple of weeks lead up time to that. Mm-hmm. Then the date of entry happens, and actually the factor's self-incentivized really to make sure that all the information goes out to the customer straight away. and that has to include a written statement. So, that goes out to them. There's normally the float that's charged, which is the kind of working funding the factor has. So the factor self-incentivized to get that out. So if the process is working properly, they should literally get that within a couple of days. Now, it's one thing to issue the written statement of service, and then it's another thing to expect a customer to fully understand what's in there.
Yeah.
And this to me is is an absolute. We can talk about this later on a little bit. Kind of fundamental educational issue that to me it's surprising that looking at some stats the other day. So 2/3 of properties in Glasgow have some element of common parts.
Right.
If you think about that, and there's 200,000 odd properties.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that are living in these properties, they're moving, they're transacting between them. They still don't have, a working understanding of what the obligations are in terms of the title deeds and legislation and all that.
Yeah.
I think it's got to start a lot earlier.
Yeah.
I'd like to see some sort of curriculum education in schools for school leavers. I think that would really help them to do that. I think our higher education institutions should be looking at introducing some kind of specific courses directly for factoring as well. I just think it's such a fundamental aspect of
life,
and particularly
society,
culture in Scotland. That having that base level understanding means that you know your rights, you know your responsibilities, you know what the factors has to do as well.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that would really help. But yeah, I mean, I can be, putting myself into a customer's perspective. If you've never had a factor before, and you're moving in, and it's one of the biggest events in your life. It's a massive financial upheaval and stress and all that comes into it. And then you get this, relatively pseudo legal document coming through, and it's hard. But that's where the factor should be trying to do their very best to try and put into plain English.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's absolutely no reason why someone can't get a written statement of service in 2 days. I mean, software can do it. I mean, our software does it. You press a button that says how many new people. These are all the people who have moved in the last week, or these are all the people who are moving in the next week. Bang, hit a button, and it'll send them a letter, or send them an email, and send them a written statement of service. It's not difficult to do. With tech.
Yeah, but I mean that education that you're talking about. When I moved house, I went from a flat to a house about 10 years ago, and at that point my solicitor went through the deed, went through factoring arrangements, and essentially my solicitor gave me a really in-depth education, the education you were talking about, as to what rights, responsibilities and entitlement, everything, really went through it with a fine-tooth comb 10 years ago. We moved again this time last year, but none of that. There was just a...
And you have a factor in your new home?
Yeah, I have a factor in the new property as well. So there was none of that with the solicitor involved. And for me, it was really stark, the differences between the two solicitors and the level of information and really education that was provided 10 years ago by one particular solicitor that wasn't provided at the move last year.
Yeah, we spoke about this in the podcast we just recorded when we talked about title deeds, when we had a solicitor in here. Mike Guthrie, and one of the things that he said is, you can get a very detailed report back from a factor of these 11. We couldn't decide whether it was 11 or 12 questions. Someone could remember, which is why I'm saying 11 or 12. You can get a very detailed response, but A, what does the solicitor do with that? And B, does he just email it to the buyer, and does the buyer actually read it? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of places in here, but I understand what you're saying. The disparity between one solicitor and another could be quite high, and this isn't about apportioning blame. This is about trying to find a better process, because I've seen it from the other way down as well, because the two people who tend to get caught up in not understanding factoring or paying for common parts or whatever their liabilities are, their burdens are, is first-time buyers, but also downsizers as well. I mean, my dad's he's 89, he's unlikely to move into somewhere now that requires it, but he's never had a factor. He's lived in the same house for 51 years. it reminds me of a conversation that I've talked about this in this podcast many times in the past. And when we were talking about education, I was at a dinner one night. I'm sitting beside an accountant, very, very well, works for a very well-known firm. And they asked me what I did for a living. And I said, oh, this is what I do. And they said, oh, factors, I can't believe it. I've been paying this factor for years. And now they want to do some work in the courtyard, in the fountain or whatever it was, and they want some more money. And it's like, well, what do you think they're doing? Do they think just putting in a slush fund or something like that? Well, okay, there is a sinking fund and that sort of stuff, but it's like, and I'm not suggesting that they should understand it more than anyone else, but they're an accountant. You would have thought that the whole number thing would have resonated a wee bit more. So I think you have a big problem with people downsizing as well, because they've lived in houses for years that just never had a factor. Yeah. But yeah, okay, so that's maybe something to pick up on. I mean, Mike, the guy who was on the other podcast, he's pretty involved in all this sort of stuff and trying to standardize. And, he had a very pragmatic view to, what can be done and what can't be done as well. So, okay, we need to move on. So here's a question. Now, one of the things that can happen is you get title deeds which are really outdated, like title deed says that, I don't know, the homeowner used to pay a £20 float. Well, that's not going to cover anything now. And the whole point of the float is the factor's not there to bankroll the property. So when there's a mismatch between outdated title deeds and updated service statements, what should prevail?
That's a really tough one.
Or is it just this is the problem, though, because people go and read the title deeds and they go, "This is what I need to pay you £20."
I think the float is a great example. So we've just gone through, a massive amount of financial turmoil following the COVID, global event, where we saw a massive spike in inflation following that, and you could have a deed of conditions that was written, well, it needs to be what we call in fact, a relatively modern deed of conditions, which is within the last 50 years.
Right.
And you're right, and that could state in there, the solicitor that wrote that, with no standardised rules, could have said, and the management fee for purposes of operating fund is £20 per owner, with nothing else in that document that says, and the owners have got collectively the option to do with that.
Yeah. So
that then potentially creates a massive issue, because step forward 50 years, that £20 float is just insufficient.
Yeah.
To cover the running costs of the building. So the purpose of the float is that sits there, works like a shopkeeper's float. You use the float to go and buy the stock for the shop, you sell the stock, and then you top the float back. It works exactly the same with the faction service. The factory uses the float to pay out on the services, the cleaning, the gardening, the electricity, whatever. Customer pays the bill, and then you top the float back up, but that £20 is completely inadequate. So most factors have to be quite pragmatic about this,
right.
but it has to be a consultation process with their customers to say, look, this is the reality that we've got. If we don't increase this, then the money's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And it really isn't a healthy situation to be relying upon the factor. There's always some element of financial fluidity to keep things going. Most factors accept that, and that's why factor tends to keep a reserve. But it can get to a point where literally the factor is using their own money and actually that money is the homeowner's money.
Yeah.
So that fund should be transferable if they decide to change the service, etc. So most factors want to be pragmatic about it and have a look at that and say, well, look, can we increase this? And then they go through a sort of a consultative process. But it's important to remember that the deed of conditions is there for the owners. Mm-hmm. It's an agreement between them.
Yeah.
So there are certain elements of that the factor will, will say to the owners, look, can we apply what's in there? But if there's any elements of that are completely impractical, there has to be a separate arrangement.
Yeah.
And then that's where the consultative process comes through. But the floats is a great example of that
Yeah.
because it can really.
I mean, all that happens if they don't agree to it, your property becomes unmanageable because you need some money to make that property work. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's different models of financial management of buildings that you tend to find probably in the last 40 years, the majority of private factors have moved to an accounting system in arrears.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they felt that, well, predates my days when they decided to do that, but they felt that was the most transparent way of doing it. Because you charge the float, you then incur the services, you then produce the bill at the end of the quarter, and it's actual charges.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're not estimating this. This is actually what we've incurred.
Yeah.
The other model is the budgeted version, which
Very,
is
very prevalent in England and the east coast of Scotland as well.
yeah,
I guess.
and that in itself, whilst it might be better, it might circumnavigate the float issue because you're asking
for money up front.
For money up front. That can also come with real issues relating to trust and incompetency and about getting the budget right and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Do you want to pick up on anything on that?
I mean, it's hard. Like say, it has to be by consent.
Yeah.
There's clearly been a failure in legal drafting.
Yeah. Well, nobody thought
ago,
about it, did they? Yeah.
So, but any change has to be by consent because you will have
Yeah.
homeowners who will,
This is what my document says. Yeah.
Entitled. So this is this is my responsibility.
One other thing we did discuss on the podcast was that actually deed of conditions are, if we could just get to a standard set, which then, it has this, and then there's a separate section that says, here's the liabilities and here's how this works, then life would be so much easier. But it just, there's a fact that's, the majority of houses in Scotland are not, and you've got some where deed of conditions don't even exist, and you've just got the title deed from 110 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, or even to the sort of standards, the Tenements Act.
Yeah.
Title conditions.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so one more thing talking about debt. So one of the other things raised in that article was that the homeowner has to pay a fee to use the portal that the factor provides. Okay. I'd like to know your view of this concept. This is so I supply, or CPL supplies software to, the platform manages about 450,000 units. There's about 700,000 factored units in Scotland, somewhere in that region. So it's a good chunk of that. We have no way in our application to bill clients for the use of the portal. So that just does not happen. So by that whoever the article was written about doesn't use our software. What do you think of that as a concept?
Well, I mean, it's a commercial decision for the factor involved, but it does seem it sounds a bit like to me like I was on holiday recently for the telephone call, and still haven't recovered.
That's allowed.
And and a couple of places that we stayed in, they charged a resort fee.
Very common there. Yeah.
So you go onto Booking.com or whatever, and you think, that's quite good. It's £80 for the night or something. And then you arrive there, and then in the small print it says, but there may be a resort fee, and then they hit you with this additional, £50 resort fee. You say, well, what's that resort fee for? Well, it's for use of the swimming pool, and it's for the parking facilities, and and if you want your laundry done, you think, oh wait a minute, this should be standard. This is not what I was expecting. So again, a commercial decision for the factor involved. But if it was us, it was involved in that, then to me it would be, well, if you're providing the facility, you're providing the facility as part of it. So
that's what your management fee is for.
That's what your management fee for. However, if they were able to prove that this was an investment that was actually improving or bringing in a better standard of service or a better product that was better able to help the management process, then it might be justifiable. But it's got to be through a consultation process. You can't just lump that kind of thing.
Yeah. Views?
I mean, I guess in my view, it would be something else to create, a little bit of resentment between a customer and a factor. And think they'd be thinking, right, I'm paying my factors fees. This is what I pay every quarter or whatever the arrangement is, and then they get something else in. What is this? Why is this not incorporated in my regular fees? And it's just another thing. And it's potentially the straw that breaks the camel's back between relationships between a customer and a factor. And think, why not incorporate it into the
No, I mean, I would agree. I mean, it does happen in England. There's to a degree, but certainly it's not been anything that certainly I've known in 26 years of supplying software into factoring in Scotland. It's not anything I've come across.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a business decision, but as Mark was saying, there's and the example I was giving as well. The customers generally are quite savvy about these things, and if they feel they're not getting value for money, they'll let you know. And quite often they'll let you know in the form of moving factor, which is
that's a podcast on its own. I think. Exactly. How easy is it to move factor? Yeah. Okay. Right. Moving on from debt onto tribunal reform, access to justice, that sort of stuff. Okay. So the First-tier Tribunal was created to give homeowners a fair and accessible route to challenge poor factoring practices. But as reported in the Times, many find the process too complex, time-consuming, or intimidating to pursue. Okay, so let's kick this one off. Is the current complaint system to the FTT truly accessible, or has it become too complex to navigate? Do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to that point about, how easy is it to change factors? And there are people who feel like they have no course to change factors, and so almost the default position is then, well, it's too hard to change.
Yeah.
I'll go to the tribunal and try and take a complaint through there. So I think the reason for the tribunal and the cases that are going to the tribunal almost stem from the difficulty in being able to change a factor for some people. I mean, to be honest, my experience in the region that I represent isn't necessarily with blocks. It's more to do with estates and ground maintenance and factoring in that sense.
Okay.
But I would say there still are issues that I would want to change with the tribunal. I would open up to group complaints, and I would say,
because they're all individuals at the moment.
They're all individuals,
which skew the numbers massively as well.
Yeah. So allow groups of residents to take forward a complaint rather than it being an individual, and I would also give tribunals the power to remove a factor as well, rather than that being a ministerial decision.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point that the First-tier Tribunal is fundamentally there to look at issues relating to service.
Okay.
So it looks at the complaint, it then compares it against the code of conduct, and it says, has the factor complied or have they not complied?
Okay.
What they're not there to do are to look at contractual disputes.
Okay.
And a contractual dispute would be relating specifically to the deed of conditions. So have the owners complied with the deed of conditions in order to remove the factor, or have they not?
Yeah.
So there's quite an infamous case, Mark can be aware of this, that actually led, the FTT case that actually led to a petition by the particular homeowner that was involved in it. Newton have had some dealings directly or indirectly in this. The background, it's not concerning our appointment.
Okay, all right. Okay.
But we've tried to give advice in the background where we can to the relative parties. But it seems quite clear that there was a gross injustice in terms of that process.
Okay.
And my understanding of it, it actually came down to something as simple as the owners that were trying to remove the factor. It's a large housing estate. I think it was 800 houses or something.
Okay.
They were obviously, they're not a professional company, they're not funded or anything like that. So they're trying to do their best. So they're notifying all the households within the community, and they're saying there's a meeting on a certain date and management's come along, etc. But the factor then came back and said, "Oh, hold on a minute, you're writing to households where there's a non-resident landlord, and the landlord hasn't received
the documentation, because they don't know, do they?
The documentation. So I believe that the Scottish Government have looked at this and they've issued some guidance in that, which is helpful.
Okay.
About how to make sure you're doing everything you can to get in touch with the owners that are not there. So we've got this kind of balancing act where if you're an owner of a house in a development where somebody's trying to move factor, you legitimately want to be able to be made aware that this is happening. But then you have the other owners in the development that don't necessarily always have the means to get in touch with them.
Okay.
And it's sad to say that sometimes we've got a landlord register, sometimes people don't register, particularly if that's a different issue. But that resulted in a situation where there was an overwhelming decision to move, but the factor refused to go. It went to the FTT and they said, look, regrettably we can't look at this because this is a contractual issue. This is relating to the needed conditions. So, I think Mark's right. I think that it doesn't seem, the tribunal system was set up as a cost-effective service, a free service.
Yeah.
So that you didn't have, the trauma and the expense of going into sheriff court and this kind of stuff. So it doesn't, to me, make sense that something as fundamental as changing the factor for them to say, well, no, sir, we can't deal with that. You're going to have to take it to the sheriff court. Or you're going to have to get this funded or appoint a solicitor.
Which then becomes way, way, way more difficult.
Exactly. So, there has to be, a really serious discussion about this and, involve the solicitors in this as well, because they're able to advise about the practicalities of doing that. But yeah, there's this kind of almost kind of perverse kind of disentanglement between the service-based decisions that you can take and contractual decisions that have to go to the court.
Yeah. Okay, so you would argue that they should deal with both.
I think it would help get a lot of trust back into the system.
Yeah.
We've got.
This is the problem, because your average homeowner is. I didn't know this. Your average homeowner, and I'm connected to this industry, yeah. But your average homeowner is not going to understand this sort of stuff, are they?
No, it's a pseudo legal environment. And it's and this is the other thing about factors that's when people set up in factoring, and this is all part of the process that's been evolved. You really don't have to have any knowledge or understanding, to get into the business. There's a balance that we're trying to strike between making sure that there's more elements of competition coming into the market, which is all very well and good, against making sure that bad operators don't get in. But that's largely if you get a criminal record or anything like that to get in. But there really isn't anything else.
Competency.
That says, do you, have you got financial competency? Do you understand, the kind of the legal situation of what you're getting into? And I think that's also part of the kind of the package in the mix to make sure we're kind of driving up these standards, and you don't have factors trying to manage something where they really don't know what they're doing. Yeah.
No, I think you're right, and I think that this comes from a place where there's people in this industry who know what they're doing. There's people in this industry who don't necessarily know what they're doing. I mean, the code of conduct is there, and it's very strict on certain things. I mean, we hear horror stories, not on a daily or weekly basis. We hear horror stories like, factoring companies have been running for years that haven't split out their client account from their firm's account, bank account. I mean, that's just madness. That's just it flies absolutely in the face of everything we're trying to do. I mean, clients' money is not a new thing. It's been around for years and years and years. So actually, we spoke with. So obviously, the Property Managers Association Scotland has become TPI Scotland due to a merger and a recent merger. And we actually interviewed. It's launching, launch before this one goes out. Neil Bissett, who's chair of TPI, was chair of PMS and chair of TPI Scotland, and Andrew Bulmer, who's the CEO of TPI. And one of the things that Andrew's always has been calling for years is competency-based training, so that actually, actually having legislation and regulation around around factoring where there is no competency based. That we've proved that these people in this business are capable of doing X, Y, and Z. That would bring massive trust back in. Certainly, when we employ a software developer, they need to show competency in what they do. Yeah,
we've got to start looking at it like a profession.
Yeah,
if you think about what the factor does, it holds client money. It's making, potentially, litigiously driven decisions.
Yeah.
On behalf and delegated authority on behalf of its customers. We've got to start thinking about it like a solicitor, like an accountant, that kind of standard, has to be there. But we've also got to balance it up against making sure that we're getting as much competition into the market as possible, because, for all of the ball dropping that factors are doing and continue to do, it is still the most competitive market that I've seen.
Yeah.
And it's getting more competitive.
Yeah. Okay. So just moving on from here, do we believe the tribunal is fair for both homeowners and factors? Do you want to take that one first, or do you think where it sits just now? Because the factor is there trying to do a job. The homeowners, moving factor, completely different conversation. But yeah, do you think it's fair for both, or do you think we need a lot of movement in what we're doing at the moment?
I think it is fair. There's obviously an imbalance between an individual with no legal background or knowledge and a corporation that can rely on potentially in-house or contracted legal services to defend itself at tribunal. So there's, by its nature, there is always going to be an imbalance between a large organisation and an individual. And I suppose the First-tier Tribunal is the best legal avenue for trying to address that, rather than having to go to higher courts and incur higher costs.
Yeah.
You're still giving people the opportunity to turn up, present their case, and I would hope get an understanding of the lack of legal knowledge that exists in an individual taking a case. So I think there are areas that we could reform, and like I say, I think taking group cases and perhaps using that to address some of the power imbalance by customers being able to support each other and perhaps lean on each other's expertise. That's maybe a way to go to address that imbalance. But I think the principle of First-tier Tribunal is good.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember as well that we're about a decade into this.
Yeah.
There was a change to the original homeowners housing plan to make people use system, and the process changed very, very slightly. The fundamentals are there, and the people that are involved are largely the same people. So they are continuing to gather knowledge and experience based on the myriad of different cases that come through. It's very, very unusual ever to see two identical cases brought by two different homeowners against two different factors. There's always nuances in there.
Yeah.
Very, very different. And that's why from the beginning, the homeowners housing panel said, look, we're not going to look at any of these cases as setting a precedent. So we're very clear about that.
Okay.
Because they knew, they had the foresight, and they knew that the subtleties
of difference,
of differences, it can be very, very subtly different these conditions and all that kind of stuff. But Mark's right. If you're a factoring firm and you're in business for a number of years, you are, and particularly with this system, much like the people that are involved with the tribunal are getting better at it.
Mm-hmm.
The factors that are having these cases are getting more adept at knowing how the tribunal is going to view certain things. And of course, if you're doing this time and time and time again, then you're getting more proficient at it.
Yeah.
But if you're a homeowner, it's the first time. Then it's not quite. But what I would say is that I think can quite often be some confusion about what the keying process is there for. We have in Newton, we have a process which we call a positive referral.
Right.
So if we have a customer or groups of customers where we just can't find an agreement with based on we're interpreting agreed conditions a certain way, we're saying, well, we're there to do that for you, to help you. Or if you're taking a different view, then rather than create inertia in that process, we actually try and fast track it for them. So we'll say to a customer, look, forget a complaint, right? Just go straight to this process, and then we'll do a positive referral. We'll help get that in to the tribunal process to try and get a decision to help us move on.
Right. Okay.
Both parties.
So actually encouraging people to go and do it. Yeah.
In certain circumstances, where we talk to the customer and say that we really think this is the best way forward. So we're not going to be obstructive here. We're going to try and remove the inertia, try and get it in there, and then the decision is what the decision is part of it. And we've already effectively presented it at least to the other one.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting because it's a real shame because there used to be a report produced every year that kind of split up all the cases that had hit FTT and spoke about them, but they don't do it anymore. I think it's just a paragraph in a much larger document now, which is a real shame, unless I'm wrong there.
Yeah, but there was a lot of work done with industry in the early days as the system was settling in, and a lot of data was produced based on the type of cases, but it was hugely time consuming.
No, I mean, I think the housing chamber did it for I think they stopped doing it a couple of years ago. And you could go in and you could analyze and have a look at them and all. And they talked about, there's an increase this year because there's 20 people from one development because you can't do group and all this sort of stuff. But it's interesting because now remember 750,000 factor properties in Scotland. And the first year after that came in, there was 26. And there was 330 last year, 2025 figure. However, now, and this is a real pain in the backside because I had to go and find this information manually. Fortunately, my son is very good with AI. This is what he does. He's a data scientist, so this made this a wee bit easier. I checked January to May, and there were 40 cases. Now, okay, there's a discrepancy of when a case is created and obviously heard. Yeah, there were 40 cases heard. And I think 16 of them resulted in award. Right, so that is a very, very okay. You could grab any data you want and you'll get a slightly different answer. But let's just take that data point: 16 out of 750,000 is not a massively high number. And people are, when you're dealing with 800 people on an estate, pleasing all of the people all the time is going to be very, very difficult.
But there's also a lag in the system we've used just recently. It's taken months and months,
right,
to get because the other thing they've introduced is the case management hearings. So that's a kind of an interim stage. It's only like an arbitration to say, look, can this get solved before we actually have to make a decision on it? So that tends to kind of particularly push it out. And actually, some of the case management decisions may be actually taking out some of the cases.
Sure.
As part of it.
Yeah, because you can see those ones, they don't go any further and they get resolved and things like that, and they'll be part of that other. Maybe the reason that the number is so much higher that's being banded about as being created. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there is, as you say, the number of cases versus the number of factory properties in the country is relatively low. But I don't think you can take away from the importance of the cases that are running through, because if you do, we spend a lot of time analysing the cases that are running through, and it really does shine a light on the practices of the factors, what they're getting wrong, sometimes what they're getting right, when the factor isn't found to be at fault. So the industry is keen to stay invested in the process. But obviously we're all keen to get the cases down as low as we can.
Any view on the number of cases?
Since COVID, the whole courts and tribunal system has had huge backlogs. So I don't know that we can read too much into the
Stats.
the number of cases
being heard,
and compare that to data pre-COVID. Really, I think it's really hard to analyse and understand if that's a worsening position or simply an administrative issue with backlogs and things. I think it's too hard to do.
Okay. All right. So trust. Let's move on to homeowner trust. Switching factors, which we have covered a wee bit. Trust between homeowners and factors is a recurring fault line in the Times reporting. Words like unethical, opaque, and impossible to change were used to describe the experience of many owners, whether it's about transparency, communication, or the process of changing factor altogether. So I guess this is about trust and rebuilding. We've touched on it a wee bit. Mark, I don't know if you want to take this one first before we go to Derek. How do we rebuild trust with homeowners who describe factoring as unethical or opaque? You guys were chatting about something that happened in your region earlier, so you must have got involved in a few things.
Yeah, as an MSP and speaking to other MSPs, we seem to get a really high number of constituent complaints about factoring arrangements.
Right.
And I think it stems from being a consumer and being able to make choices in every area of life as a consumer, but it feels like you don't have the power or the agency to make choice when it comes to one particular bill that lands. People talk about, the only thing certain in life is death and taxes. Well, some people say death, taxes, and factor fees.
Okay, I've never heard that one before. You obviously have given the grin, but yeah.
And I think people really struggle with not having the ability to make an individual choice, and in particular when they see what they see as a poor service, whether they're right or wrong, they feel that they are getting a poor service in something and they don't have the ability to do anything about it.
Okay.
We've had occasions where constituents have talked about issues with factors, phoning to make complaints, and the power imbalance between the factor and the individual is it is explicitly recognised by the factor and saying, well, there's nothing you can do about this, go and try and change this if you want, you'll get nowhere.
Okay.
And you can understand why people get really, really angry and frustrated about that. So I think there is an issue, particularly on kind of the bigger housing estates that I represent, where it tends to be grounds maintenance factors, that they would like to have a choice. We talk about it being a really competitive market, but for some consumers, they have no access to that competition. They have no access to say who can and can't be their factor, what level of service they'll provide, what level of fees they will charge. Yeah. And that's really difficult for an individual. And I think there have been cases as well where a factor has given up a contract, passed to another factor, and the first time a homeowner finds out about this is when they get the bill through and it's got a different company on the bill. So that's like a double whammy. It's like, well, I can't change the factor, but the factor can change without me even knowing about it. And that was an example in Cambuslang. So I think that stems from a real frustration as an individual, as a consumer, that we have choice in every area of our life, but seemingly not in this one.
Yeah, okay, no, I do get it. Just before you come in, Derek, there's can I choose my mobile phone provider? Yes, it's an individual contract. Can I change my electricity supplier, my gas supplier? Yes, I can. But this is a group of people who collectively need to make a decision, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's so we've done a lot of work recently. I know you've been involved with our tech guys on this.
Okay.
Trying to kind of streamline their kind of comms, communication policies within the company, and we had to do a lot of kind of philosophical work on what is the nature of the service. Looking at different types of industries and comparative industries, and etc. And one of the conclusions that we came to is that what a consumer may look at as like a comparative type of company, I don't know, like a phone provider or electricity or whatever, is a linear service.
Yeah.
So it's direct between the consumer and the service provider, and there's a transactional arrangement that's made between the two. and then if you're unhappy with it, you move, and that's a decision that you can take. Whereas as part of the communications tools that we're still trying to develop, there's been a realization that we've got a non-linear arrangements where we can have one customer that comes to us and says, hey, I've got a good idea, can we do this? Or can we not do it? And then we're then not able to make that decision because it has to involve the larger community, and it becomes a bit like a kind of spider's web. In the old days, it was relatively simple before we actually had the electronic communication. You call meeting, everybody in a room, town hall meeting, if you like, and you reach a consensus and you do that. And that still very much happens. But I think it's also important to recognise that although there have been in the last few years standardised models, development management models, that to an extent try and standardise the way that decisions are taken and removing factors, etc. We're still dealing with a legacy of decades of completely bespoke deeds and arrangements.
Yeah.
So we looked at one recently. It's a development on the south side. We went to there with another factor just now. This owner who's actually at wit's end has been through the tribunal system. Again, there's an issue with the contractual versus the service. But when we had a look at the deed of conditions, and the deed of conditions are relatively new, they're written I think maybe 2000, 2001. The requirements to move factor were actually bizarre. That they had to get every single owner to a meeting.
Yeah.
So normally it's a quorum, so it's a minimum number.
Yeah.
But this is every owner.
Yeah.
And then at that meeting, the percentage to move was something like 75%. It was just absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing, once Mark was saying there, when you had the benefit of having a good solicitor that took you through that. If you're considering buying a property, and if your solicitor isn't going into that level of detail with you, 10 years later when you look to make that decision, it's nigh on impossible.
Yeah.
And a company like Newton that are keen to grow the business, to bring customers in, we obviously want to make sure that there's a much more standardised way of looking at this.
Yeah.
And it's fair and it's equitable. Yes, it has to be a democratic decision.
Yeah.
But if the development we mentioned earlier on, where there's 800 properties, it'd be nigh on impossible to get 401.
And is that what the deal is there?
Well, in this one, it's slightly less than that, yeah.
Right, okay.
But the frustration when we're talking to this owner was palpable.
Yeah.
Now, we do know that there's consideration moving towards compulsory owners associations.
Yeah.
And that's being looked at just now. Now, part of the consideration for that is that if a deed of conditions isn't working properly and it can be proved not to be working, then the owners collectively have got the option to bring in a standardised model.
Right, so you can change it. Yeah.
Correct. So you may go from a situation where you need to get everyone in a room and then it's 3/4 of the owners have to agree, to a situation where you only need 20% of the owners in the room.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to
Yeah.
make that move.
I mean, the housing estate, grounds maintenance only, I mean, you can absolutely understand it. I mean, one of the biggest challenges is and one of our jobs as well, CPL's jobs as software providers, is to be able to communicate with the homeowners there in multiple different ways to make sure that they're engaged and client in the engagement in the development. But there's a hell of a lot of apathy within this market where you get if there's a small patch of grass over there, or I mean, let's think about the house that I own is now. It's got a play park and all of this sort of stuff. In fact, the factors just changed the grounds maintenance provider because they weren't providing a very good service. But if you've got, so there's, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 houses that can see this bit, and there's another 50 that can't. excuse my French, but do they care? I was going to say something else about one. Do they care? There's this apathy, and that's the problem: is getting all of these guys over here who it really doesn't affect day to day. They probably pay £5 a quarter to maintain that bit of grass. Is it really an issue to them? And I think that's one of the fundamentals as well, to get so many people to a meeting, well, not to even to a meeting, to actually, or maybe to a meeting, to actually make the decision.
Yeah. And I think that'll be a frustration for an individual resident as well.
Yeah.
They're, sitting in their house in a development of hundreds,
Yeah.
and they're sitting there going, well, I know my neighbours, I'm sitting here, I'm not happy. Are my neighbours happy?
Yeah.
Are they not happy? Do they care?
Yeah.
I'm here on my own. I don't really have the ability to communicate
with them all.
It's probably good for them to just be aware of their neighbours' feelings and actually think, well, actually, if nobody else cares, then there's no point in getting myself worked up about it. Everybody else is happy.
Yeah,
or maybe everybody else is sitting there thinking, we're not happy with the service either. So I think, and the apathy issue is real, but things like annual general meetings, owner organisations, I think would be really, really good in terms of giving people power back, giving people agency back to be able to communicate with each other fairly regularly, to get an understanding of the feelings of the estate or the development as a whole, and then map out where they go from there. I think that would be really helpful. I
mean, at the end of the day, if you're giving a good service, if the factor's providing a good service and doing a good job, then there should be no reason for, you cannot please all the people all the time. That is a fact of life. But fundamentally, if the service is good, there should be no requirement or no real need to move.
But also when it comes to moving, I do think that the different developments that I've seen and the different requirements to change a factor, I think is absolutely nonsense. It should absolutely be a standardised, understood threshold for attendance and decision. Why do we have?
Yeah, you agree with that?
Any industry that works from a standardised model, as long as it's fair and equitable.
Yeah.
Everyone's in the same playing field. Everyone knows what's involved in it. What I would say is that, however, with the larger developments, we've seen this over the years where you can have opposing groups within one development. So you could have, unless you get that balance right, you could have, if you set that threshold too low, it can move 1 year, and then 6 months later it can move again.
And that's no benefit to anyone.
No. So, and you actually, over the years, we've spoken to solicitors who have been involved in drawing up these, and you can see this thought process. But one thing I wanted to touch on as well, Brian, I know we're talking about communication, and Mark was saying this, about having a compulsory AGM, actually generating a facility every year to get everyone in a room to talk about things and doing things a wee bit more old-fashioned way. I'm very, very worried in the industry that, in terms of the technology that's running through just now, that there's an over-reliance on removing that personal contact in favour of streamlining
efficiencies.
So, we see companies out there, and I don't want to be critical of them because they've got their own business model, but looking at contact forms, chat robots, etc., and it's removing that human content. And I don't know how well that's going to go. As a business, we have to be, we're a people-driven business. We have to be empathetic. We have to keep that level of human contact. Otherwise, the frustrations are just going to grow and grow and grow. We're seeing, in terms of AI, more customers are using AI to communicate with us. Now, at face value, that might seem like it's a really convenient thing to do. To take your argument and to whack it into an AI engine, and then to create an email to send it to the factor. But that actually, from the customer's perspective, I don't think it's healthy. Because again, the potential is that they're losing that human element. I also read some statistics recently about the kind of new generation
Gen Z,
Gen Z
Oh,
now,
yeah.
or sorry, Z, whatever.
where they're very apprehensive about picking up the phone.
Yeah.
That they're much
It's
more
because they spend their entire life doing this.
Yeah. And I get there's nothing that we can do about that. That's just a generational thing. But all of these things are slippage from, the way that I don't want to sound an fart, but the way that it used to be. And I can't even remember before we had email. And it was,
So do I.
And it was, there's a discussion to be had. Book the church hall.
Yeah.
Have that meeting with your customers, try and figure it out. And if the problem is unsolvable, then you actually make that decision in that environment where you say, well, look, maybe it's better that that our company doesn't manage this, and maybe it's better that you look for something can help you to do that.
Yeah. I do get the point, because there's a lot of tech out there that is effectively just making a factor completely faceless. You don't ever have any contact, no human contact whatsoever. If you've got a problem, bang it into here, and then that then it will be dealt with multiple threads from that. I mean, don't get me wrong, technology is required, and there's a balance of what should be in there and what shouldn't be in there. Yeah, but then if every single thing, if you never talk to anybody and every single thing goes through tech, how do you justify your management fee? Yeah, your management fee is for management. Yeah, it's for people to actually do things and to look after your property in the right way. Yeah, so I do get it. Do you have anything on that comment about AI?
No, I mean, I don't think we even need to go back when we're talking about the old-fashioned way, the church hall. I mean, we can have virtual meetings, we can have people sitting in the living room with their laptop, but everyone connected, and it's just that way of connecting people. All these customers in one estate, they can't communicate. There's data protection issues with customer details and everything else. Obviously, they can't turn up to your office and say, I want the phone numbers for every person in the estate, so I can chat to them all. You can knock on a door, but that's time consuming. We have busy lives. So I think that any way of facilitating that communication, whether it's physically or remotely, is really worthwhile.
I mean, our tech allows that to happen, but it's whether you can do that. Because I mean, okay, so I am a homeowner in a development. Do I want everyone else in that development to have my contact details? No, that's my decision. That's not my factor's decision. Yeah. So it is a.
Yeah.
I mean, tech can facilitate that very, very, very easily. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that'd be an interesting question from the data commissioner, actually.
Yeah.
And try and get some consistency on that point. But come back to Mark's point. Yeah, I mean, we do have regularly. The town hall meetings, as you're right, it is evolving now into Teams meetings or Zoom meetings with customers, and it's for lots of customers, it's much more convenient than they can do it from the car. Stop the car on the way home from work and go back.
Okay, so just moving on, because we're taking up a lot of time here. And okay, so Mark, Labour plans to table amendments to the housing bill. What kind of changes would empower homeowners without overburdening the sector?
So I had amendments to the housing bill at stage 2, which I tabled, more for a debate. I didn't push them to a vote and just said that we would come back at stage 3. But it was looking at reform of the tribunal system along the lines that we spoke about.
Okay.
Talk about a way of standardising the method of changing factors, and really trying to do some of the things that we've spoken about communication, mandatory annual meetings, mandatory management committees, ways of enabling that communication between users of the service, so that people don't feel so isolated and trapped into a contract that relies on potentially hundreds of other people to agree to change.
Okay.
Yeah, and behind all this, there's two aspects to this. There's the customers feeling that they are empowered to make a decision and to make a change, but also there's the continuing deterioration of the housing stock. in the background,
Yeah.
which is becoming a major problem.
Yeah.
And it's how we get that kind of liquidity of decision making back into the system, particularly for the older stock that really is getting to the point where serious decisions have to be taken.
Yeah.
Sometimes quite significant financial decisions.
Yeah.
To bring a building back up to a normal status.
Yeah. I think. Sorry,
I was going to say, and I don't think every change has to be legislative as well. We've been pushing the government, and actually the government have agreed that they should and will review the code of practice. That's been in place since 2013. So
2011 Act, isn't it?
The Act was 2011, but the code of practice I think came in through regulations a bit later.
Yeah, sure.
But the government have been promising to review and reform that for as long as I've been an MSP, almost. I think so.
Well, there was a tweet to it in 2021.
Yeah.
It was really tweets.
Yeah,
There was a dancing around the edges. There was nothing kind of fundamental there.
Something about sinking funds and things like that, and various other things. Yeah. No, and you're right, and that does need to happen. We spoke actually in that podcast about title deeds about sinking funds and things like that, and we talked about and I gave an example of where in fact I guess I almost benefited from it, but you're talking about these buildings that have been there for 100 years, and there's wear and tear on a car. There's wear and tear in property when you're letting a property. What's happened to that property while you've been in there? 80 years go by. In fact, I think someone mentioned in that podcast, 50 years. After 50 years, you normally find that something, this needs to start breaking down or whatever. Whatever the number of years is. But for that period of time up to there could have been 10 people living in that property. Not one of them have actually put in money, if a sinking fund doesn't exist, or a fabric fund or whatever you call it, to actually look after the decay and the wear and tear of that period they've been in the property. And I was very fortunate. Do you disagree?
No, it's the nature of how things are. So if you look at the average property owner's story, they start off in a flat, quite often a tenement flat. They'll be there for a number of years. They'll then look for something slightly bigger, so the terrace house, semi-detached house, whatever, housing development, and then that keeps going. So this to me is part of the psychology, the culture, if you like, that flat, unless it's a downsizer, that flats are quite often looked as a stepping stone, as a temporary accommodation, even if you own it. And some people have done quite well out of it, where you've had markets that accelerate and prices, etc. But it's that kind of short-term fact that people will owe there for a couple of years that's resulting in a lack of investment. And the other thing about the kind of Scottish psychology is, because we've all grown up around tenements, and our parents were around when the tenements were there, and our grandparents. It's almost like you think the tenements are going to be there forever, and they're permanent, and they're going to be fine. Well, they're not. They are. We had in the 80s, there was massive investments. There was the sort of UK money that came through that refurbished a lot of properties in Glasgow. Changed the roofs famously. But there's so much more. That's 40, 50 years ago now. Those big investments that need to be made.
Coming back to that point, if there is that period of time that you're in the property, and then you get to the point where the roof needs replaced, if it's not one of these ones you're talking about, and suddenly the 8 people who are currently living in that have to foot the bill for that, when everybody in the last 50 years has gained the benefit of it. So it's a very, and I mean, I mentioned this in the podcast the other day. I had a bolt hole in Glasgow before I lived here, when I lived up kind of Stirling way, and I moved in. I worked in this industry at the time. I moved in, can't remember who my factor was. Had it for a couple of years, sold it, and then found out a couple of years later that it was a massive cost to redo the roof. So, you could argue I was lucky, but the person I sold it to is obviously very unlucky, because then they've got a portion of that. So it seems that a lot more could be done to spread the cost of that over those people. But then, as someone mentioned in the podcast the other day, which hasn't got out yet, that then changes everything when it comes to, well, what's my affordability? Because suddenly my mortgage affordability has changed dramatically, because I now, as well as have my factoring fee, I've also got to be putting money in for the upkeep of the property possibly in the future. Okay, all right, moving on. So this is public versus private models. Okay, so in the wake of that recent scrutiny in the Times, some politicians have gone as far as to label the factoring industry as a racket, calling for a shift towards non-for-profit or community-led alternatives. So, Derek, what's your response to, I think it was Paul Sweeney who said, characterise the factoring industry as a racket?
I think the term certainly catches the imagination.
Yeah.
And it probably reinforces with a lot of people who have had experience with factors what the kind of fundamental belief structure is in terms of the way that the factor operates. And this again goes back to where I think we should be at. We should be starting the education process with people when they're much younger, before they're getting into the housing market, so they've got an understanding of how it works. But I think it's also important to recognise, there's not one standard factoring model. You have your housing associations that they do have to make money, but it's self-invested, so it's not technically for profit. But they tend to operate in an environment where they have an element of their services are in-house, and there can be a restriction in the choice that you have. But in terms of their arrangement with the housing association environment, they have to make sure that it's the best value, etc. You then have the private sector, where the vast majority of factors don't have an in-house service. So everything is contracted out, or by its nature, there's a competitive environment. It should be at best value. No factor wants to pay out any more money than they have to, because they have to have stress and aggravation of collecting that. But there is a niche within the private factoring sector, where they do carry their own in-house trades.
Right.
And to anyone that's doing that, obviously they've worked through their business model, but I would really caution them to make sure that they've fully thought that through, because even with the code of conduct, the way that it's written, because the code of conduct is designed to accommodate different types of factors. It's designed to accommodate housing associations. It's designed to accommodate private factors. But for the private factors that are carrying their own trades in-house, you've got to make sure that you've got a fully thought through service proposition that's making sure that there's no incentive for you to overinflate the costs effectively, because that's coming back as a profit in the bottom line. I've got less concerns with the factors that don't do that, because they are subject to the debtor model, and again there's an element of factors actually have to put their own money in to keep things afloat, etc. Like before, sort of discussed. So I think that understanding that definition is really important to get that clarification. Because if I was in a tenement flat and my factor was providing all of the services, and I didn't have a choice, and they were coming along and they were saying this is an in-house service and this is going to cost X amount, I would have questions about that. How did you ensure that's best value? How do you know that's the proper market value? Have you tested that against other firms? Well, they'll have great difficulty getting other contractors to come in, even to provide quotation.
Because they know they're not going to get it.
Because they know they're not going to get it. So that to me really needs, and maybe that is something through tightening up of the code of conduct that actually makes that distinction between housing associations who do have their own internal code of practice to make sure that they're not overcharging, and private factors who, despite what it says in the code, is probably not tight enough to look for that.
Any views on?
I mean, it again goes back to that, the psychology of being a customer and not being able to change who provides your service. You're not be able to say what service I'm getting and what services I'm paying for. So that, and as well, when you're complaining to your factor and the factor's almost recognising that imbalance, well, You know, it's impossible to change us. You can't get rid of us, so you're stuck with us. So that then reinforces people's opinion. There have been instances where I would say the practices of particular factors in particular areas has been a racket. You know, I worked with a group of residents who removed a factor who provided a grounds maintenance service for a patch of land probably the size of this room.
Okay. It's not a big room, but
no. And they charged over 100 residents £100 a year for grounds maintenance on this patch of land.
Okay.
They successfully got together because they were so angry about it, and they switched the service from the private factor to the local authority.
Okay.
The local authority provided, I think their rules were you have to provide 25 years maintenance in advance, and then they provide the service in perpetuity. Now, the council charged individual residents less for 25 years maintenance that they paid that particular factor in 1 year.
Right.
So the residents came out with a profit by the time the float come back and things like that.
Okay.
So those are the situations, and
that's an extreme example.
That's an extreme example,
yeah,
where you can see why people feel like that.
Yeah.
And that those particular instances. But again, it comes back to that feeling as a consumer of not being in charge of your own affairs, not being in charge of the service that's provided, and the charges that you're having to pay every month or every quarter or annually, or whatever it is. I think that's where that is, and if we address that, then in terms of the changing with communications, annual meetings, management committees, standardising methods of changing factors, strengthening of the code of practice, changes to First-tier Tribunal to allow them to remove factors who are operating in that kind of manner, then that's when the changes in the bad acts in the industry then start to reflect on public opinion.
Okay, so I guess if you change the rules around how difficult or easy it is to change, then housing associations have commercial arms to them. A number of them do, and therefore they can coexist. It's effectively what you're saying, because the private factors will be sitting here, the housing association factors will be sitting here. Give the consumer the choice, and they'll decide which one they want to go with.
Yeah. I mean, just listening to that example. I mean, my factors brains instinctively want to know who's involved, all the circumstances, and all that kind of stuff. But it does sound to me like it was a restrictive service, that there wasn't a choice that was given. I think one of the for the factors that don't, because as I said, I think factors that carry their own in-house services, I think that should almost be looked at as almost like a separate type of business.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of ones that don't do that, that there is an urban myth out there, and we hear it repeatedly, and I think it's a generational thing. It goes back, to the days when the factors were rent collectors. You used to all the factors come and close the curtains, right? But factors don't. Don't obtain any additional income from instructing trades.
Yeah.
And the code of conduct is very clear from that. So there's a disincentive for the factor. Sorry, there's an incentive for the factors to make sure that they're getting it at best value, because every pound that they're paying out, they have to collect back in.
Yeah.
In the unlikely event that the factor does do that, there's a requirement in the code of conduct to disclose it.
If they take any portion of that,
to make sure that they do that. But that's what I'm saying. There needs to be almost a clear definition between the factors that effectively their business is on, trying to get the best value, making sure that it's the lowest cost, so they don't have to go out and chase the money as much. And the ones that are carrying it in-house that effectively don't have to adhere to any of that kind of stuff.
Okay, so we've talked about education a lot, and we've talked about kind of things that are maybe wrong, but things that are also misunderstood. Derek, do you want to have a think about? Do you want to talk about what you think kind of we are where something is being more misunderstood than actually being a problem?
What we touched on before. I mean, it's the process of moving factors. It can be. I mean, you literally need to have a lot of these sometimes to figure it all out.
Right.
So as Mark was saying, if there was if we're moving towards a standardised approach to that, we've touched on the kind of the urbanness of hidden income. I think also in terms of the way that the factor thinks about their customers.
Yeah.
I know we haven't really touched on this yet, but the longer you're in business, the more you have to realise that the longer you've managed a development. And by the way, we've got competitors that have managed the same tenement for over 100 years, generationally, without many issues. But the longer you're managing a property, the more likely it is that at some point you're going to reach a point where more than the majority of the owners of that development didn't vote for you, didn't ask you to be the factor, didn't select your services, etc. And that to me is an absolute critical realization that you have to come to when you've been in business, because all of the newer companies that are starting up at the moment, it's they're all very enthusiastic and they're trying to do X, Y, and all that. But at some point you get to a point where you're going to have a mechanism in there, a consultative mechanism, to go back to your customers on a regular basis, en masse, and say, how are we doing? Where can we make improvements? Where are your concerns? And actually get that conversation going. So Newton, on an annual basis, I don't know if you guys have been involved in this, maybe you have, drawn data together. But we use an independent firm, marketing firm. They go completely independently to our customers, and they survey them, and they refine that survey every year. Then it's not just a kind of a written thing; they actually go and telemarket, to get all that kind of stuff as well, just to make sure that we're not making a big presumption. I'm not saying we get it right all the time, but I think that's something that factors need to start to be thinking about, is to make sure that we're regularly getting that feedback, and they're looking at their service and their way of operation. So I think the way that the public perceive factors, I think, is quite often it's you're an immovable force, you're not listening to me, where can I get my voice heard? And when you are just one of potentially hundreds of customers within a development, that's incredibly frustrating. So there has to be a mechanism, a way in there to set. I mean, we've spitballed different scenarios over the years. We've looked at whether we actually have almost like a kind of a tertiary kind of directors forum within Newton, where we're putting it out to like chairs of associations to come in to help us to guide the service. So it's a little bit like what housing associations do, because we know, because of the nature of the business, that we're going to be around for a relatively long time, and that brings with it certain challenges in keeping that relationship where it should be.
Okay. Right, we're running out of time. We're way over. So we could talk about this all day. Right. So any one thing before I ask one final question, Derek, you want to pick up on before we, there's a lot of stuff in the press. There's been a lot of stuff talked about. Is there anything else you want to kind of pitch in at this point before I ask one last question?
I think I don't want to steal much thunder because I think we might better get on this. But I think there needs to be, what we've discussed, we need to have a good cold look at the FTT. What's it there to do? If it's there to take pressure out of the court system, and it's actually there to make sure that there's a free point of view service for owners, can we get them to look at contractual issues? And we need to make sure that factors are meeting with their customers regularly.
Yeah.
And it's not all done behind the veneer of an IT system.
Yeah, totally agree.
that's
No. You need both. We're here to facilitate the balance.
Because that to me, that scares the life out of me. We could get to a situation where we've got an AI robot handling the inquiries and that's coming in from customers.
It scares the crap out of me as well, to be quite honest. But yeah, okay. No, and you are right. I mean, at the end of the day, tech's there to do one. I mean, tech can be there to run the whole thing, or tech can be there to just, log on and tell me if you're coming to the meeting, or or reminding people about the meeting. I mean, tech can do everything. Okay, interesting.
For me, the two key things for me are facilitating of communication between residents and a standardised process to change factors. Those would be, I think, the two real key points.
Okay.
That would really drive up trust and support from residents in the industry.
Okay. You stole my last question, but all right. Okay, but never mind. Okay, so to me, so I'll just think of what off the top of my head. So to me, there's a number of things we've discussed today. One of the things that we've touched on is that whole solicitor thing in the middle of this as well, though, because I think there's a lot of people who could be involved in a kind of a shift in the way in which all of this is viewed and worked with. So I certainly think that solicitors should be involved in that as well. But you mentioned a word there, trust. Okay, let's just, and you probably answered this a wee bit, but how do we get trust back from the homeowners? How do you build trust with the homeowners?
You've got to have a process in there to make sure that you are not excluding somebody from communicating what it is that they're looking for.
Right.
That's part of it. I also think, again, sort of the old-fashioned view of it, but I think opening up the factors environment to customers is really, really important. I can remember the days, actually not that long ago, where you went into some factors firms and was watching their bandits when you walked in, and that in itself was telling you what the psychology was.
Yeah.
As part of it, that's largely gone now. But it'd be nice to think that a customer would not have any qualms or worries about physically coming in, to see the environment in which the factor is working in. Also, an open invitation to representatives of MSPs to come in to Newton's offices to see how the business is run. I think that would be a really interesting layout for you. Mark, you can see some of the stuff that we, because we're focusing rightly on the negative stuff.
Yeah, but there is a massive amount of positive.
There's a huge amount of positive stuff that goes on, and it's how we. Part of the difficulty in running a factors business is you get so used to the routine of how it operates. Sometimes you don't kind of pick your head up and go, well, that's working for that reason. Yeah. Can we push that out and allow that to happen with other customers? Yeah. But there's no doubt that, and actually, I think I think it's the Scottish Law Commission. Looking at these compulsory owners associations, that to me would be a game changer. Yeah. In terms of empowering customers. Don't get me wrong, it places a huge amount of responsibility back on homeowners. But it wasn't so long ago that our trade association was the Property Factors and Owners Association.
Is that right?
Well, it was actually as well before my time. But that obviously goes back to a different time and different circumstances. But that kind of concept about actually having mutual interest in where you're trying to get to. Mm-hmm. What do you want as a homeowner? You want your building to go maintained. You don't want to pay too much for it. You don't want to have to worry about getting through to the factor or the factor not wanting to listen to you. These are all kind of fundamental things.
Okay. Last word from you.
If we're looking at it and trying to get around the frustrations of being an individual, being involved in a collective contract, then the best way of getting around that frustration is actually making that collective contract work for the collective. And the only way you can do that is to put the collective together.
Yeah.
You can't have them all in their individual houses with their individual opinions, not knowing what's going on round about them. If they're going to operate a collective contract, then they have to work and operate as a collective when it comes to what they want to see out of that service. And the only way to do that is get them together, talk with each other.
Okay. All right, gents, thank you very much for coming in and having a chat. And I'm sure there'll be much more discussion about this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.